right then. So the sort of the purpose of these discussions were so that we could follow on from Lama's teachings and kind of just discuss whatever was alive for us in terms of any reading that we've done, or our responses to Lama's teachings, and of course any way that that's affected our practice. Some of that would have been fed into the discussion, but we're actually here with an open space to have a conversation. So really no format for this as yet. We might sort of see how it goes as time goes on, and kind of, what best suits our needs. But for now, just willing to sort of open up the space for anyone to kind of share what's going on for you and how you've been approaching these teachings, or anything that you want to say about it, really.
Do you want us to raise our hands or just shout out, or how do you want to do it?
It might be easier to raise hands, just to kind of keep it, and I can bring you in case there's hundreds of burning points all bubbling at the same time. But we don't have to treat it too seriously. So if you do happen to jump in, that'll be fine. Have you got something you want to start off with?
I can start if you like. I mean, nothing very profound, but I guess I sort of signed up for this because I find it really hard to engage with these kind of texts. I just find them a bit like discussions about angels dancing on pinheads and things. So I thought, well, if I throw myself in, maybe I'll start to relate to it, have some kind of meaning. And I had a real aha moment when Lama said, think of them as meditation instructions, and it suddenly kind of came a bit alive. And I was thinking each of those, it's not this and it's not that and it's not the other. It's kind of a counterweight to the kind of bear traps you might fall into. So when I started to think of it that way, suddenly it became something I could relate to, because I might not particularly be falling into that bear trap right now, but actually I am that one. So then if I contradict that gives me somewhere to go with it. So suddenly it became something I could work with, rather than just something that was very academic and dry and really, turn me right off. So it was that particular thing was really helpful in terms of me just making sense of it and being able to do something with it. And
have you found that has affected your meditation practice in any way? Yeah.
I think just playing, because when I started to relate to that, and I couldn't tell you how, because I can't remember now. I can't always remember what happened in meditation. Yeah, the narrative of it particularly. But I guess there was, like I say, there's some. It's not this, and I'm thinking of the introductory verses where it's eternalism and nihilism and all that, essentialism and nihilism and all of that. So I think and at different times I probably lean towards, well, I can pin it down by it being this, and then I need to kind of pull that back from, okay, no, you're doing exactly the same thing, and then you lurch in the opposite direction. So it's a bit of a kind of drunken walk between extremes. So just sort of playing with that in the practice, it's quite interesting. But I couldn't tell you which ones I played with. It depends, what day and what was on my mind, I think. But as a framework, that was really helpful.
Thank you. Thanks for starting myself. Dechi, I noticed you had your hand up. Do you want to come in with something there?
Yes, thank you. This word arising has been really bothering me. Yeah, there's a sort of, I noticed that with after Lama's teaching, I had a spate where I got really engrossed, and I got some of the texts and I got really engrossed. And then I noticed that I can kind of put it down and almost not think in those terms for a while, and then get engrossed again when something hooks me. And I think the hook, there have been a few hooks here, this word arising is bothering me. I just want to say there is a rising. Of course there's a rising. What do you mean no arising. And I noticed that it meant a lot different. It felt different when I said originate. If I say, oh no, there's no origination, that's okay. You can tell me there's no origination. You can tell me there's no cessation, but arising, oh, definitely there's arising. And I'm not sure, I think it's a sort of word that's very difficult to avoid, because I noticed in Khenpo Rinpoche's, what does he say? He I think his first, he says something about dependent arising. Yeah, whatever arises from conditions does not arise. I think, hang on, that's a complete contradiction. I mean, we're going to be looking at logic here, and there's a complete contradiction in the first line. And I'm thinking, is there a problem with this English word arising? Are we using arising for too many different things? And I notice I kind of feel it's a kind of process word, and that there's some sort of process going on. I can't say where it begins or where it ends. There's some process going on. So arising has really bothered me. And when I'm sitting, I definitely seem to be experiencing arising. But I can't say I'm experiencing the first moment of arising or the last moment of arising or moments of arising. I'm just experiencing arising. At least that seems like an appropriate word to me. So I'll pause there, because that's just the first hook.
I'm interested in, so having sort of used that logic then, so you're experiencing a rising, but you haven't been able to see the first moment of it or any kind of cessation of it. So in what way can you say the word is arising? Because you're saying that that's an okay word for you. So how are you talking, are you actually just saying there is experience?
Yeah, maybe that's right. Maybe it's too vague. The word is just too vague, because something is going on. Something's happening. It's not nothing. This is not nothing.
Mm.
You know, this is something.
Mm-hmm.
Something's occurring. I don't know what it is, but something's occurring. So it feels like there needs to be a word for that. And that as soon as you start to analyze it, you become nihilistic. You know, the whole thing just seems to slide into nihilism very easily.
I found, I don't know if anyone had seen it on the notes, but I put a quote in from Murti, and literally it wouldn't surprise me if no one has, because I only put it in there this afternoon. But Murti puts in the one legitimate conclusion that one can follow from this, that can follow on from this procedure, is that the real, and he's got capital R, or what is, is transcendent to thought and cannot be conceived in terms of the empirical. And he's quite, he says, you don't want to make the mistake of ending up in nihilism. And I think that this is an important sort of area, isn't it? Is actually these reflections taking us to real. The conclusion is there is real beyond thought, that thought isn't going to manage something. Lama? Oh, hang on, I can't hear you. You're muted.
What's empiricism or empirical?
I think it's kind of what you can take by your senses.
And so what did he say? Don't confuse.
It cannot be conceived in terms of the empirical evidence that comes through your senses.
Is that really true? It can be conceived, but it can't be conceived in terms of what comes through the senses.
That's how I've understood empirical.
Yeah, I did look it up in the dictionary, because when people use words like that, I think, oh dear, this is now introducing another complication into the discussion, because it's now in terms of a term that I'm not used to using. Yeah.
I thought it actually meant it was based on your experience rather than logic. Empirical is based on your experience, or what you know, rather than reason and logic.
It's usually conceived of in distinction to a priori, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, I think the meaning of empiricism is usually only conceived in distinction with a priori, so before experience and after experience. So I was just kind of agreeing with Dorje that the a priori is more the abstract thought.
Can you explain a priori? Priori.
Well, I always understood that as being abstract thought
Oh, I see.
before any experience occurs.
Oh,
So that wouldn't really be a very Buddhist way of making
right.
a distinction.
Oh, I see. That's what I worry about using words like that, that you really have to know what you're saying and what that implies. And I don't.
I agree.
Yeah, because I had kind of assumed empirical being based on your observation. You know, empirical data is observed data, and for me, observed being kind of limited to our sense faculties.
Yeah, it's observed or experienced, isn't it? It's what we observe or experience, as opposed to something that we do logically create an abstract, if you like, or through using logic.
But the trouble in English is that we don't really distinguish something that we've experienced. We can still think it's objective, you know, that your senses, your experience, like if you're experiencing them in this non-dual way, it's still the senses in a way, isn't it? So it's still empirical, at least depending on how that word is being used. So I'm not sure which. It's quite interesting what Matthew was saying, like it's usually used to distinguish in a different way of thinking, where you think that the experience is, which is first the abstract is precedes or follows the what was it you said? Abstract thought, it comes before the experience. Is in a system that is talking like that, is what you're implying, which, as you say, isn't particularly a Buddhist way of. So we've introduced a word that has implications that we don't really want, it seems to me. Yeah. You know, I don't know enough about those philosophies. Maybe if you know them well enough, it all comes round again. Yeah. I always find it very difficult. I always find it very difficult to name that distinction between direct experience and when we've distorted it. You know, what to call that? I end up going like this with my fingers.
Victor, how does that?
I just wanted to add, I mean, in some ways, I just want to confirm whatever Darshan explained. I think it's a scientific way to observe the world. And just to add to that is that empirically, in some ways, that word is good for us too. But for science, there is all what is observable through some kind of instruments. So all the sensory perceptions, what scientifically, by some kind of instruments, we can measure it, that empirically we can prove. So we come up with some kind of a theory and then prove it. And if we in nature keep repeating, then becomes a law. But the problem is that once we enter into a subjective domain, so somewhere we start to measure some kind of emotions. The science so far is not able to measure exactly everything. What it measures is on the brain, that there are certain sections where it will change the color, and the electromagnetic field will be show up differently. So when you're scanning the brain and you are applying some kind of different emotion happens, you are happy, you're sad, different way will lit up. But this is as far as empirically we can go. But then if we go further down and we start to talk about thought forms, that's completely outside the domain of anything empirically observable. It is just kind of a medium of exchanging ideas between human beings, but the thought has to be formulated verbally or wrote down. Yeah. So just a little bit add on. But I think Dashun did get it right.
So I wonder if we kind of move slightly away from topic here, or maybe it's not. Maybe this is the kind of the thing. I'm just wondering in terms of do we get caught up in that same old argument about trying to work out what exists and what doesn't exist, and how that, because at the end of the last session that you were teaching on, there was a question here about arising. Are we equating arising with existing? In these three verses, are we equating arising with existing? And are we saying that that's when we start looking at this non-arising, non-ceasing, do we find ourselves in a non-existing state or a non-existing meditation or whatever? And how does that fit in? Yeah, maybe that's where this discussion could be pointing, rather than sort of scientific observable stuff versus our actual meditation experience. When Deci's saying there is definitely a rising, does that mean that there is definitely something that exists in my experience? That would be a sort of the question that I would start going towards.
I
Richie?
have gather my thoughts. I had the same issues with Deci as far as using arising and how not just arising, but some of the other terms and how they're used are unclear. But what I wanted to say about what we're just talking about is that I guess from my experience and what I've read about our perceptions, the problem seems to be that we trust our perceptions and think that we are seeing reality when we're using our physical form and our senses and our thinking. And I'm looking at the list of the 12 nidanas, and it seems like I've heard something that point between when something comes into our consciousness and we give it name and form, that's where an error can occur, because that's where the prapancha come in. And my prapancha, what I'm seeing with my senses is different from what you're seeing. And if I take mine to be real and not recognize that my vision, just to talk about our eyes, when we understand from what science has taught us how many things we're taking in through our physical senses, but we only process a very, very, very small part of it. And our mind is filling in the blank spots. So there's so much room for error. And if we take our view as being the right view and the only view, it's just wrong from the beginning. And so I think to open up to that possibility of error, we can maybe begin to see beyond what our limited perceptions can, our physical form can tell us, if that makes any sense.
So following that then, does that suggest to you that by not kind of thinking that what we currently perceive to be the full story, that somehow by not doing that, truth will...
I think at least it opens it up, the possibility of seeing a little more clearly and opening to other possibilities, which I think is huge. Instead of walking through the world with such certainty that what we're seeing is what is real, you know, turning things upside down. Maybe it's not.
I also just want to highlight something you said right at the beginning, which is when something comes into our consciousness, the kind of the use of the language there being, so there is this thing called consciousness, and then there is this thing outside of our thing called consciousness, and that thing somehow comes into our consciousness, and then we give it name and form. It's actually quite a complicated kind of setup, which I think that's what a lot of these verses are really sort of pointing at, right? Is we use this way of talking because we sort of think that's how it works. Is that actually how it works? Or have we created a whole kind of story to explain this thing called experience? Dorje, your hand?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but I find whenever I start in looking at this, I become increasingly irritated and frustrated. And very quickly, actually. I can begin to follow some of the arguments, but then I'm thinking, well, this is just intellectual gymnastics. And, you know, I can't even define half these words. I can't even define for myself what exists means. And then when we use the word definitely, Dashu, I'm not definite about anything. I mean, what I'm definite about is that I definitely don't understand any of my experience. And, you know, I feel very quickly when I start doing this, I want to drop it because it's not going to get me anywhere. Now, that may not be the case for everybody else, but that is the response that I have. This is just not going to get me anywhere. There has to be another way of simply experiencing this. And I'm not, you know, I don't know what that way is yet, and I probably won't know for a long, long time. But I just find that as soon as I start indulging with this, I really get irritated very, very quickly. And I wanted to say that because, and I hope at least somebody else here gets irritated, because I get irritated immediately.
I wonder if you could say, what do you think is being irritated? Where's the irritation coming from? Why is it irritation and not fun and enjoyment?
There's something in me that immediately tells me this is not going to work. And it's very strong and it's very intense. And it just, I don't know. I can't explain it any more clearly than that. It's just that I just immediately feel this is not going to take you anywhere that is going to ultimately be of value. And as you can probably see, I feel it quite passionately.
Yeah, and I suppose my counter question to it would be, how do we know that You know, you weren't the only person who said it. There were quite a lot of hands up there. How do we know that that irritation isn't exactly the thing that we need?
I think it's the thing that you need to look at. And how you look at it, I'm not entirely sure. But I just simply want to say to myself, look, you need to go back to your meditation. You need to look at your experience. I think Lama had a hand, didn't she?
Yeah, Lama, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in this because I think sometimes when these things are presented, of course, they're presented in translation, which the translations irritate me. So when I get to that immediate frustration, I have some reference. I can go to the Tibetan and I can go and look at the Tibetan, and I use meditation instruction and meditation as a way of kind of trying to get to know Nagarjuna a bit, because I think he must be saying the same as the other instructions I've had, and so, and it's quite late in my career really that I'm looking at Nagarjuna in any detail. So I could really emphasize with feeling frustrated, and I think it's absolutely right that we say, well, what is meant here by arising? I think it's that's exactly what we need to be looking at. And what does it mean, appearance? What does it mean, exist? What is it? So that I find I'm only interested when I'm applying it to my actual experience. So if I take just one line even, and I often find this with philosophy or anything like this, that you just need a sentence or two to kind of home in on what those questions might be. And I certainly wasn't finding it off the point to be examining what we meant by empirical, by the way. I thought it was actually to the point, like what do we mean by these words? Are they actually, can you actually use them? Because the commentaries are using them all the time. Well, not all of them, but some of them. And you get into a discussion and you think, well, actually, I'd have to tease all this apart. And, my time's short, so I need to decide what I'm going to tease apart and what I'm not. But if I go back to these very simple Karikas, actually, they're very simple. And I just look at how I think. And when it comes to arising, the word in Tibetan could also be birth. So something takes on existence. Now, when I look at what I mean about, when I think the world is really there and it exists, I definitely think it exists from one moment to the next. If this world is here, it goes from one moment to the next. If it actually didn't go from one moment to the next, I wouldn't say that existed. So when I look at my own experience, what do I think? I'm in a world, I've taken birth in a world, and it must go from one moment to the next. I do think like that. But maybe when you look, that isn't true for you, but it's certainly true for me. So when I notice that is true for me, I become interested in keep going back to what Nagarjuna is saying. Well, okay, let's take it that that's true. It exists, and then it goes to the next moment. So how are you experiencing it going from one moment to the next exactly? And that's when I find myself thinking, oh, hang on. That can't, and I actually experience it as not actually being quite how it is. And if you do that in a relaxed way and just keep coming back to it, it's actually quite, you notice yourself trying to come to a conclusion all the time. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's like that. Oh, another word for it is this. Oh, this is what it is. Oh, that's what it is. And each time you do that, you kind of think, well, you could just keep looking at anything that you come up with to see if actually you have come to a conclusion. And then Nagarjuna seems to tirelessly enjoy, you know, sort of saying, looking at all the different conclusions you might come to. And so looking at it experientially like that, I think I really sympathize with what you're saying. Am I experiencing arising? You know, like something that wasn't there and now is there. Is it really there? What do I mean when I say it's there? And quite often I think I know what I mean until I really look. Well, not quite often. I mean, it takes ages, really, to realise. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, I don't understand. I don't realise it's mysterious. You know, that's an easy solution, isn't it? Oh, yeah, it's mysterious. I don't understand. But that's cheating. But what is that not understanding? What is that? Why is it mysterious? Why? What am I trying to do with reality? So for me, it's very meditative. And even though I've kind of had all these instructions all these years, I really like I really like it being made to go back and look and see what. Anyway, that's just my experience.
Thank you.
It's having quite a strong effect on me looking at it more thoroughly. Experientially.
Meditatively.
Meditatively. Experientially, meditatively, yeah.
Alan?
Yeah, it just really brings out this absolute compulsion that we have to try and fix things one way or the other. You know, I must understand this, and to actually stay on that kind of knife edge of, you know, of not doing that. It really is a kind of knife edge.
It is. I agree.
Yeah, Georgie? And Matthew?
I think, in fairness, it may be a cop-out, but to me, I just come to the conclusion that I can't reach any conclusions. And, you know, and the only way, in a sense, is for me, is just to rest. There's something about acceptance. There's something about acceptance here. And it's resting in that acceptance. And I don't feel it's a cop-out when I say I can't come to any conclusion. At this point in time, I can't. And, you know, that's just my experience.
Can't come to a conclusion is a very nice conclusion.
Yeah.
Georgia, is your conclusion that you don't know? And just being with that?
I'm not sure. The conclusion is that I don't know in the way that I am trying to know. If that makes sense. I can't know in this manner. And then somehow I have to just let that all go. And there's something about an acceptance that then allows me to rest. And in a sense, in that resting, I am knowing. But I can't pin that down or make it logical. But it's teaching me something about the way I'm going about it, if that makes any sense at all.
What you're saying makes me think about, Lama, you've said that place of not knowing is very valuable, is not the right word, but valid place to be and full of potential.
That's right.
And Matthew had his hand up.
Thanks. When I started, so my question was kind of following on from what Lama was just saying about how to practice with the verses. how to reflect on our experience with them. So my question's about that, because when I first came across the Karikas quite a few years ago, and since then, I found them really wonderful. It was in a more koan-like poetic translation that I mentioned in the seminar, bachelor's translation. And I would just, as soon as my mind touched them, I wasn't thinking about them, but I would just go into a sort of space of great peace and freedom and sort of bliss, really. So I was actually been quite scared, and I didn't read any more sort of intellectual translations of them since then, because I didn't want to lose that. Actually, I didn't want to start thinking about them. I thought maybe perhaps I'd done so much kind of reflection prior to that I sort of, had felt I was at the boundaries of thought, or seeing them so much that maybe just touching the Karikas with my mind was causing this sort of sense of liberation. But really, I'm so kind of pleased to be in contact with you and with Lama, because I do want to, I feel I really kind of lack a sort of Vipassana type reflection into my own everyday experience, the experience where most of the time where the external is real and I'm a selfhood in here, and objects of thought denote existing entities or realities, and those realities are not empty or indefinable, and they are completely amenable to logical treatment. All the things that in meditation and in other experiences I know is not really true, or maybe it is, but it's neither true nor not true, and the distinction between them is empty. So what I've been doing with Lama's translation since the seminar is just very simply in that sort of everyday mind. When I have a thought, thinking, well, where does it arise from? It's not itself. It's not from itself. It's not from something else. It's not from both. And it just kind of stops the thinking, really. So my question is that a good reflection to be doing? I'm very inexperienced. I haven't had instructions in, pointing out instructions. Is that a good reflection to be doing? Is it the right sort of reflection? And yeah, just hearing more about that and what reflections one might do.
Lama, do you want to say a few minutes?
Yeah, no, that sounds really, really good, really interesting as well. The distinction between when you're looking in meditation and when you're applying it in your life. And certainly that's, I find that valid, that in my daily life, I immediately start to take things as real, whatever that means, but I immediately start to notice, I do think things are going from moment to moment, and are they? And if they're not, what am I experiencing? And and my mind does stop. When I'm reading these Karikas, I try it each way. I think, okay, so supposing it was true, supposing it did, supposing the past moment did cause the present moment, supposing it did, and then supposing it didn't, and I can't make sense either way, but really it stops you think, as you say, it stops you thinking, because that, as you say, that going back and forth between one extreme and the other, it can't and it can't. And, as Dorji says, well, maybe you'd be able to relax then, but inevitably within moments you're again doing it again. So it makes it kind of very alive and sharp, because next time it comes up, you've got, you can relate to it again in that same way, which is kind of keeps reminding you. So yeah, but it makes sense what you say, Matthew. Makes a lot of sense. And very interesting that was the effect of Stephen's, as you say, poetic translation. From a translator's point of view, it's very irritating. But, I do also know that many people find it very helpful. So it's really interesting to hear how you found it helpful. Mm.
And then the last line of that verse, or without a cause. So it's quite difficult for me not to start thinking when we get to that last line, having, said it doesn't come from itself or something else, or both, and then the sort of killer punch, or without a cause. So, and like I said, I didn't really want to start thinking about it with my intellectual mind, but maybe I should. And so I wondered, whether without a cause, whether he was distinguishing between cause and conditionality.
I don't think so. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, because in another of the verses, he goes into, doesn't he, Nagarjuna? He goes into conditionality a bit. And that really struck me years ago when I read that as really important for a Buddhist in the way they think of the Dharma, because he's saying, he's questioning what is conditionality. He's saying that if a cause, if anything in the fruit of a cause still has something of a condition, has something of the condition in it, then there would be then that's eternalism. Then there would be permanence. There would be stasis. But if the condition, if the fruit of the condition had nothing of the condition in it, then why is it a condition? So he says, not severed, not permanent. In which case, what is conditionality? So I never worried about that sort of intellectually. I just knew I didn't understand what was meant by conditionality. And I found that quite very freeing, really. But if we're going to sort of think about it with our thinking minds, then what does he mean by, at the end of this verse, without a cause? I couldn't help thinking about that, if the thought is not from itself, it's not from something else, it's not from both, but it's not without a cause. That would seem to me to be, anyway.
I think that's the right place to go.
Do you?
Yeah, you have to go there.
Okay.
Because that really defeats your mind completely, doesn't it? Because to say, oh, well, there aren't any causes and conditions, that's nice, I can just relax. Well,
no, I wasn't saying that, because he's saying that this is pratityasamutpada.
Which again, what does that mean? That's something
Well,
that
exactly.
I'm interested in. But going back to what I was saying,
it's not with, sorry, yeah.
Then he's not denying pratityasamutpada, but I suppose when I was saying that, I wasn't particularly thinking. I was just thinking myself that, okay, there's no causes and conditions, so I can relax. That just seems to be all right. And then you look again and you think, well, hang on, no, that's not all right. Because that takes away all the meaning of anything. There's nothing, no path, no, there's nothing. So you then you kind of have to come back to, well, as you say, okay, so I don't know this. And actually, I think this is where, I think it was Richard who was saying is, oh, this is where the opening is. This is where the opening is, because where I am at the moment, where I'm looking from now, it's either one or the other. There's either causes or not causes, or it's either is or it isn't. And if I don't go to either, I just go blank, because I've got myself in that place, and that's the place from which to open, actually. And it's quite good to keep going back to thinking. I mean, I'm doing it at the moment. I'm doing it a lot, and it's helping me to understand those much more profound teachings that go, that kind of go into the Buddha qualities, because the answer must not be within that framework. And it's so difficult to go beyond that framework when it's all you can see. So going to that place where okay, I want to say this must be the cause and effect, otherwise there's nothing. But then we're not saying the answer is nothing, and we're not going back the way we just came. And actually, what might open up from there might actually be a whole different dimension or dimensions to the actual nature of the universe. I mean, it might just be, it's coming from it's a bit like if you're watching a film, and they keep using the example of an illusion or a dream or an illusion or something like that. When you're watching a film, and while you're watching it and you're in the story, you think, the horse and carriage in this, picture is the same horse and carriage in the next picture. So the horse and carriage in this picture caused the horse and carriage in the next picture. Sort of like it's a continuity. And it clearly is, they're all related, and there's clearly something going on. But actually, in terms of if you're only looking at the film, it isn't true. It's not true. It's just light playing on the screen. So the real causality of that story on the screen is actually nothing to do with what's playing on the screen. It's completely different. It's not even in the ballpark. I don't know if this makes sense. And that to me sort of takes me into the Mahayana Sutras and the kind of complete explosion of the universe into endless worlds, because or even into mathematical conundrums and things, because it doesn't lie in what I'm thinking of as my next moment of experience is a continuity. The continuity is coming from something totally other to what I thought. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I'm sort of aware that we had only penciled in an hour for this conversation, so I want to sort of open it up and just see the people who haven't yet had a chance to ask any questions or make any comments, if there's anything that has been alive for you or a question that you'd like to ask, even if it's a question that we just make a note of today so that Lama can talk about it next Friday. Yeah, hi Dan. You'll need to unmute.
Oh.
That's it. Oh, you were there and now you're off again.
Are you going?
There you go.
Wow. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I don't know how to make myself bigger. I've listened to what you've all said, and I think I've experienced everything that you've spoken about. And that made me think that, and I thought of the day actually, and continuity within my day, and the way my mind changes and what kind of activities I've been doing and how it affects my mind. And many years ago, when I began, when I was with the Kempo and studied with him a little bit in Marpa House and the Shambhala Center, I remember what I was learning about then kind of it's a crude way of putting it, but did my head in, but also intrigued me at the same time. And I had this feeling that there's this story about the lion, the dead lion being on the ground, and that the maggots come up and eat it from the inside. Maybe Lama Shenpen can bring that up again. But I thought these teachings are like that. They eat you. You can just allow them to go into the back of your mind and eat through. And one of the things I've noticed is that in the morning, very, very early, just as I'm waking, when I am not interfering, then something pops up that is a kind of experiencing it rather than, beyond thought. And then some of the things I've been reading, which Lama Shenpen, her Nagarjuna, and the interpretations, I've thought, I think that some of this only when I'm not there, those kind, do you know what I mean? And I think all of us experience not being there, when the irritation isn't there, when it's kind of like, oh, there's no past. It's just. That's all. I hope that makes sense. And thank you for allowing me to be on the course. I'm so happy.
Thank you. And nice to have you here.
Yeah.
Anybody else from the Rangdrol and then Krista.
Thank you.
This isn't very well formulated, but just listening to everyone and my experience of what appears to be moments, there's something about the language around. You can see that past and future are cut off. You can see, looking at things in moments, that, the horse and the carriage, they're not actually, there is no cause to that really. But at the same time, there's something about before and after. Like, take everyone's lives from whatever perspective you're looking at. From, say I'm looking at, I don't know, just looking at someone that I've seen and then don't see them again for 10 years. It seems valid to say, from my perspective, there's a before and after. It's like they become. Like the word becoming seems to work for that, because that's got nothing really to do with this past and future. It doesn't have to be talked of in those terms. It seems quite valid. But and I'm thinking that could be described as non-arising. Maybe the words non-arising just sort of make us think something comes into being and then passes away. But you can have a sense of arising, and it's becoming almost, and that sort of puts, for me, that's in a kind of realm of much more open space, even though I don't have anything else to say. I just sort of throw that in.
Thank you. And Krista?
Lama just mentioned as a screen and the film idea. And I understand it like this, that we go to the cinema and we're watching a film, or it could be our video or our tablet, for instance. It's the same kind of idea. In the cinema, it's dark, because otherwise we can't see any film. There are no pictures if it's light, so it has to be dark. That's one thing. So then we sit there and we watch this screen. This film on the screen, and we get, and it's just appearing. It's not arising. It's just there, isn't it? Instantaneously, it's there, without putting this things together with the actors and the events and the house and whatever happens in that scene. It all happens at the same time, doesn't it? And we get really engrossed in in that film, whatever it is, the love story or murder or whatever, and we feel we then almost also in that film as well, because we think, oh my God, what's happening now? Oh, that shouldn't have happened. Oh no, he got killed. Oh no, no, we cry. Okay. But at the same time, there is this screen, without the screen, there is no film. Okay? But the contents, which is the film, this happening, flowing and moving stuff and all that kind of thing, or we think it's moving anyway, because it's so fast. And but there's this screen as well, and we totally forget about this screen, which is not moving, is it? The screen is not moving around. It's the contents, is the events, or the world, if you like. The world is changing all the time. Yes, that's kind of thing. But the screen itself, or I could say, instead of screen, maybe awareness itself does not come and go, does it? Or it's not there, or then it's there, and then it's always there. But we're concentrating, we're focusing on the film so intensely that we forget all about the screen, which is there. And when we switch off, when it's off, then lights come on. Oh, but that screen is not going away, is it? But if the film has finished, the events have finished, they've gone home and God knows what. But and we think, well, that was a fantastic film. Or maybe not. Our mind decides, our mind then judges, oh, that wasn't a good film. Oh, I think it was a really good film. That's our mind is always doing that kind of commenting on what went on there. But the screen itself is just pure, it just doesn't do anything, it's just there. And it's there.
So in the way that you're using language there then, Krista, you seem to be suggesting that there is this thing, let's say awareness or screen, that is always there, but we forget about. And then there are these appearances of some kind that are changing, that are coming and going within that thing that is always there.
Within, well, one could say consciousness and its contents, for instance. But consciousness can't, if that goes away, well, what happens then? Then it's, well, we can't even explain without consciousness, but who's going to explain about that? There's still somebody who needs to explain it, okay? But the contents, yeah, it just, it's and that's the play of whatever, you say, the play of energies or something like that, the lights flickering in and out, and this existence and non-existence. I think what we do is we separate the two, but the two are, the existence and non-existence are not separate. They are not separate, but we separate them. Our minds separate it into this or that, and that's separate from that separate. And that's where we have problems, into the polarities, but they linked, they not just linked, they together. So it's like flickering in and out like that. And that happens so fast, we can't grasp, our mind can't grasp it, but it wants to grasp it. And that's where the problem is.
Well, I think that this is where we can say that these verses are challenging that whole way of thinking. Is that actually, that, yeah, a nice description of what you think is going on. And then these verses say, is that actually true?
But the dream is almost exactly like that.
Yeah, seems to be, doesn't it?
But if people...
I notice we've come to the end of our time, and I just want to check, because I noticed that Far had his hand up, or seemed to have his hand up, but maybe I was mistaken. It looks like I was mistaken. So thank you everybody for your contribution. What I will just remind us of is it would be very helpful if we could, if you could sign up for the Karika event, and then you'll be able to see the teaching. That's the link that's in there. So please register if you have. Well, yeah, I know that you haven't, because there's only a few of us that have. So if you could register there, that would help, I think. And then if you want to contribute to the discussion, you can do it there. And then we can keep all those questions in one place for Lama without having to sort of interrupt anyone else and sort of get people to collate stuff or anything like that. So thank you all very much. Lama will be teaching next Friday, which, you know, discussing any questions, but also maybe moving us on for a few verses or into a different section that is particularly stimulating for her. I'd also just kind of want to bring in terms of thinking as well, Lama asked us as part of our homework to take a look at the Kachanagota Sutta, because there's a lot of stuff here about how the language is being used around arising and existing, and Praticca Samuppada, and there's maybe sort of other discussions that we can have around that, because it's very much tied into this, you know, existing and grasping, or existing and suffering. Also, there was a document that I collated, which had all of the various, or some of the various translations. I've put it into that discussion group, but what I'll do is I'll just click it in now quickly for you, where I've put some of the translations. If there are other translations, let me know, and we can kind of keep them side by side, so that if we wanted to refer to different uses of language alongside each other, we can do that. But I'm also collecting some Pali stuff, references that kind of go alongside some of these verses. So for today, for example, that one of nothing can exist from other than itself, from itself, other than itself, both or neither. There's a really nice Pali translation where the Buddha is talking about it in terms of suffering. Does suffering arise from itself? Does it arise from other? From both, neither, of which, of course, the Buddha refutes all of them. And then the man says, so are you saying that you don't know anything about suffering? And he's saying, no, I'm not saying that at all. You know, we're talking about suffering. It just doesn't arrive with a cause, without a cause, from itself, from the other. So that's interesting parallel. So I don't know. I put the link in that document. So,
am I registered?
Yes, you are.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Thank
and
you,
I'll also
everybody.
send you a link. So we dedicate this punya to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings realize complete and perfect awakening. May the heart's awareness awaken
Awaken and unawakened.
where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken fully. And thank you all for your contributions and thinking and discussion, and Lama for being here. So.
Well, thank you, everybody. I've got lots of questions there.
Yeah, I'll send you that link, Lama, with where that discussion's happening.
Right.